Here's why Sylvie wants to destroy the Time Variance Authority. While Wednesdays are for Marvel Cinematic Universe-induced sleep deprivation, Thursdays are for firmly affixing my vibranium foil hat, wanton speculation, and wild theory crafting. And after the third episode of Loki, titled Lamentus, we have one hell of a theory about what's coming down the pipeline in the remaining 3 episodes of this series. Not only could this theory explain why Sylvie wants to destroy the Time Variance Authority and why she bombed the sacred timeline, but also who's really behind this force of omniscient fascists and why they're so fixated on Loki variants in particular. Now, in order to talk about this theory, we need to spoil the first 3 episodes of Loki. And if we're right about this, that could be considered a spoiler for the rest of the series as well. So if you're not up to date or you're worried about that kind of thing, then make like the God of Mischief and find the nearest exit. Alright, let's get into it, shall we? After slowly building up this mysterious Loki variant that's been ambushing Time Variance Authority agents and stealing their reset charges, and then seeing her wreak utter havoc on the sacred timeline, we actually get to spend some meaningful time with Sylvie Laufey's daughter, a Loki variant who really hates to be called Loki.
Don't ever call me that.
Hex Harvey?
No, a Loki.
And while she definitely seems to be holding back from the Loki that we've been following, variant L1130, and she knows a lot more about the TVA than we do, her goals, as they're laid out in episode 3, are relatively simple.
Your years in the making plan was to tear the place down, create the ultimate power vacuum, and then just walk away.
Sylvie enchanted Hunter C20 with mind margaritas to learn the location of the Timekeepers so she could use the chaos of the sacred timeline bombing to infiltrate their offices and ostensibly murder those space lizards where they sit. Now, we don't have any idea what she hopes to achieve once the Timekeepers are dead beyond killing the people that are hot on her tail and creating a power vacuum, a plan that's apparently been years in the making. Or do we? Well, thanks to a new featurette from Marvel Studios entitled Meet Sylvie, we have some of our best clues yet about what this Loki variant is after, why she has such a deep-seated aversion to being called Loki, and who might actually be running the show in lieu of the Timekeepers, who it increasingly seems like are just pure TVA fiction designed for propaganda purposes. And look, it's easy to dismiss this behind-the-scenes featurette as marketing fluff, but there are some seriously striking details contained within. The first of which is a shot of a child version of Loki, better known as Kid Loki in the comics, where it's later established during the original Sin arc to be one of many versions of Loki existing within the Loki that we know and love, but that's neither here nor there. As Sophia DiMartino talks about Sylvie's arc in the show and her backstory, we see a couple of particularly illuminating previews of what's to come. We see Sylvie in TVA custody wearing a Time Twister collar and being escorted to presumably the Time Theater or maybe even an audience with Judge Renslayer herself. During this sequence, when Sophia DiMartino mentions Sylvie's backstory, we see the shot of Kid Loki being brought through a time door in TVA custody. As Sylvie mentions in episode 3, she's been hunted by the Time Variance Authority her entire life. And that's why she likely doesn't remember her mother super well and had to teach herself magic like enchanting people rather than learning it from her adoptive mother Frigga. Now, this shot of Sylvie as Kid Loki is likely a flashback of her arriving at the TVA as a kid, which she's reliving in the Time Theater while in custody. So why would the TVA arrest a wee baby Loki? Well, it has something to do with who's really running the show here, and hint, it's not the Timekeepers, because, more likely than not, there are no Timekeepers. Rather, it's another Loki, and specifically, it could be Richard E. Grant's mystery character, one who's heavily rumored to be an older version of Loki himself, the God of Mischief. Now, Loki is a master of deception, and we learn the horrifying truth in episode 3 that all the TVA employees are all variants that have been mind-wiped and plucked from their respective timelines.
What? What did you say?
They're convinced they were created by the Timekeepers, these godlike beings to whom they all have unflinching allegiance. Not only that, but we learn that Mobius has never even seen the Timekeepers himself. Only Ravonna Renslayer has a direct line to them, and she could easily be being manipulated as well. Because doesn't that sound like something a Loki would do? What better way to ensure your power than by controlling time and bending it to your whims? And who would threaten that order more than multiversal variants of the only person potentially capable of pulling off such an elaborate charade like another Loki? So consider the evidence. The only real variants we've seen thus far in the Time Variance Authority on anyone's radar have been Lokis. In fact, Mobius even mentions they've had to hunt down more Lokis than any other type of variant. But what if they aren't hunting down other variants at all? What if they're only hunting Lokis? After all, Mobius thinks the best way to catch a Loki is to use a Loki. And look, sure, back in episode 1, we saw a scroll being processed, and there was that Goldman Sachs banker Failson, but who's to say they're not variants of the God of Mischief from their own respective realities as well? I mean, shapeshifting, that's pretty Loki-like. That long hair and being a son who's aggrieved with his dad, also pretty Loki-like.
My dad is on the board of Goldman Sachs. One little call, and your whole job is privatized.
Perhaps originally this TVA Loki wanted to recruit other gods of mischief like a Council of Kangs, or maybe they've been hunting down rogue Lokis for quite some time and just underestimated what a child would be capable of. Because clearly somehow Sylvie managed to escape their clutches as a kid, which is why she needed to then ditch the Loki name and has such a bitterness towards that identity. Because to be a Loki is apparently to be hunted relentlessly by the Time Police simply because of who you are and what you're capable of. Moreover, it's what a Loki represents in the Marvel Universe. One of the overarching through lines of this show is a debate about free will and predestination, as well as the ongoing battle between order and chaos. The universe is always drifting towards entropy, disorder, and chaos, and the Time Variance Authority seeks to control time itself by pruning out events, variants, and alternate paths they deem to be out of alignment with their grand plan. Sylvie puts it best herself in this featurette and also explains why the TVA wants her and Lokis like her to be erased.
The universe wants to break free, so it manifests chaos, like me.
Both Sylvie and Loki L1130 struggle with exerting control over chaotic systems despite being agents of chaos themselves. As we've seen in the MCU, Loki has tried to conquer Earth, Asgard, and he even replaced his father Odin to rule in his stead while watching some deeply silly plays.
It was indeed hilarious.
Sylvie literally used a bunch of time bombs to try and kickstart the multiverse. Their identities are predicated on misdirection, mischief, and subterfuge. They can be used to uphold order, but more so they subvert the status quo for an unexpected end. And thus, it makes sense that another Loki could be masquerading as the Timekeepers in order to fulfill their own devious wants and desires. However, as we've seen, every Loki tends to underestimate the other Loki variants. L1130 calls Sylvie a pale photocopy of himself and refers to himself as the superior Loki. Sylvie thinks she can simply enchant this Loki because he's clearly weaker-willed than she is, and this Timekeeper Loki thinks he can just stick a bunch of jackbooted time cops on his variants because he's in control and everything is clearly going to go according to his master plan. But as we've seen teased in the Meet Sylvie featurette, there are shots of Sylvie and Loki inside a mysterious temple. Maybe it lies on the other side of that golden elevator leading to the Timekeepers. It appears as though Sylvie is fighting with Judge Renslayer here, maybe in a last-ditch effort to prevent her from seeing that those space lizards don't actually exist. Rather, there's just a man behind the curtain, a fellow god of mischief that wants to eliminate the competition for reasons unknown. And look, this is all speculation for the time being, but we do know one thing for certain. There is a lot more than meets the eye happening both with Sylvie and the Time Variance Authority. And you should never take a Loki at face value, especially when that face is 3 space lizards in animated form or statue form. Anyway, we'll just have to wait and see if our theory holds water or if it falls apart like a TVA agent on the wrong end of an energy truncheon. In the meantime though, folks, let us know, what do you think of this theory? What do you think Sylvie's real plan actually is? And who's secretly running the TVA?
Because I approve the missions.
Good point.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.